Imagine this. Elon Musk walks into a five-star hotel wearing a hat that sparks instant controversy. What starts as a policy dispute quickly escalates into a viral spectacle, but what happens next will leave you speechless. The Grand Manhattan Hotel was a symbol of prestige, a towering beacon of luxury in the heart of New York City, where the elite mingled, business moguls sealed multi-million-dollar deals, and tourists splurged for a taste of high society. The gleaming marble floors reflected the golden glow of extravagant chandeliers, while the murmur of sophisticated conversations blended with the faint hum of an orchestral piece playing softly in the background. The aroma of fresh espresso drifted from the hotel cafe, mingling with the scent of polished mahogany from the concierge desk. For most, it was just another elegant afternoon, until something, or rather someone, disrupted the seamless harmony of the lobby. At the center of this refined atmosphere, a man walked through the automatic doors, drawing immediate attention. He wore a sharp black blazer, well-fitted jeans, dark sunglasses, and a bright red MAGA hat, a bold statement in an establishment that prided itself on neutrality. His presence alone would have been unremarkable, but the familiar structure of his face, the sharp angles of his jawline, and the unmistakable aura of self-assurance sent a ripple of recognition through the room. Was that Elon Musk? At first, only a few passing glances were cast his way, but the whispers spread like wildfire. A teenage influencer lounging near the cafe gasped, fumbling for her phone, her manicured fingers flying over the screen. "No way, is this real?" she muttered, already live-streaming. Across the room, a businessman, half listening to a call, narrowed his eyes and stole a second glance. "Can't be," he murmured under his breath. Yet the figure in question remained unbothered, strolling past the velvet rope entrance to the hotel's exclusive lounge, his presence commanding the space without a word. The crowd's intrigue grew. Some guests watched in hushed awe, others in disapproval, their gazes flicking toward the bold red hat, a symbol that stirred emotions no matter where it appeared. The tension thickened as murmurs turned into speculation. Why was Elon Musk here? And more importantly, why was he wearing that hat? In the corner of the room, Victoria Chen, the hotel's head of security, stood frozen for a moment, her radio crackling to life on her hip. She exhaled sharply and turned on her heel, making her way briskly to the manager's office. "Sir," she said as she stepped inside, "we have a situation in the lobby." Richard Langley had spent the last 20 years ensuring that the Grand Manhattan Hotel remained a sanctuary of elegance and discretion, a place where the world's elite could exist without unnecessary disruption. A seasoned hotel manager, Richard prided himself on upholding the strict policies that preserved the establishment's prestigious reputation. His office, nestled behind the concierge desk, was lined with accolades, framed photographs with high-profile guests, and a polished oak desk that remained meticulously organized. At that moment, he was reviewing an updated security protocol memo when the urgent knock on his door interrupted his concentration. Victoria Chen, the head of security, stepped in, looking slightly more animated than usual, a rare occurrence for someone trained to handle anything from celebrity tantrums to corporate disputes with an unshakable calm. Richard adjusted his reading glasses and leaned back in his chair. "What is it?" he asked, already sensing that whatever this was, it wouldn't be simple. Victoria hesitated before answering. "Sir, we have an issue in the lobby. A man just walked in, wearing a MAGA hat." Richard frowned, unimpressed. "And?" Victoria exhaled. "It's Elon Musk." Richard removed his glasses slowly, pressing his fingertips together in thought. "You're certain?" Victoria gave a curt nod. "If it's not him, it's an uncanny look-alike. But based on the reaction in the lobby, I'd bet my job that it's the real deal." Richard let out a quiet sigh, running a hand through his neatly combed salt-and-pepper hair. "Of all the days," he muttered. The Grand Manhattan had a strict policy against overt political statements, and a red MAGA hat, especially on a man as polarizing as Elon Musk, was bound to cause a stir. The last thing the hotel needed was a media firestorm. Pushing his chair back, he stood, adjusting his cufflinks as he prepared to step into the fray. "Let's deal with this before it escalates." As he and Victoria made their way toward the gold-trimmed lobby, the scene was already unfolding before them. A gathering crowd, phones raised, murmurs swirling. Some guests whispered excitedly, snapping photos discreetly, while others exchanged disapproving glances, muttering about maintaining decorum. A pair of business executives near the check-in desk shook their heads, irritated at the disruption. James Carter, one of the senior security officers, was already stationed near Musk. Standing firm yet cautious, his muscular frame a silent warning. Beside him, Mia Rosario, a younger and less experienced guard, looked visibly uneasy as she scanned the crowd. Richard exhaled slowly. He had handled royalty, Hollywood icons, and Fortune 500 CEOs, but this was different. A social media spectacle was already brewing, and if he didn't tread carefully, the Grand Manhattan might find itself in tomorrow's headlines for all the wrong reasons. Steeling himself, he stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Mr. Musk," he said, keeping his voice neutral but firm. Elon Musk turned slowly, lowering his sunglasses just enough to reveal a glint of amusement in his piercing blue eyes. "Yes," he responded, his tone casual, as if he wasn't standing in the middle of an increasingly divided crowd. Richard locked eyes with him, feeling the weight of the moment. He had dealt with powerful men before, but there was something about Musk's presence that made the air in the room shift. "Sir," Richard began, keeping his tone professional, "I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat. We have a policy against political attire in the hotel's public spaces." The murmurs in the crowd intensified, the tension thickening. Musk smirked, crossing his arms. "A policy against hats?" he said, his voice carrying just enough mock surprise to stir curiosity. "That's an interesting one." Richard held his ground, but even he could sense that this encounter was about to become something much bigger than a hotel policy. Richard Langley had handled his fair share of high-maintenance celebrities, foreign dignitaries, and billionaire egos, but something about Elon Musk's smirk made the tension in the Grand Manhattan's Grand Lobby feel different. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that precedes a moment going viral. Richard could already see it: Elon at the hotel, MAGA incident, Grand Manhattan debate, trending before he even finished this conversation. He knew how these moments unfolded. One misstep, one poorly chosen phrase, and suddenly the Grand Manhattan wasn't just a luxury hotel. It was a battleground for public opinion. And yet the hotel had a policy, and policies were meant to be enforced. Richard took a measured step forward, keeping his posture as controlled and authoritative as ever. The eyes of dozens, soon to be millions, were watching. "Sir," he said evenly, his hands clasped behind his back in the disciplined stance of a man used to getting his way, "this is a private establishment with a strict policy against political attire in public areas. We ask that all guests respect that standard." Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted an eyebrow, his amusement barely concealed. "Political attire?" he echoed, glancing around. "I see plenty of people wearing brand logos, sports team hats, and let's not forget the Wall Street executive in the corner with a tie that practically screams lobbying dollars." He turned back to Richard, crossing his arms. "Isn't it funny what we choose to call political?" The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. Some nodded in agreement, their phones still raised, while others whispered about how rules were rules. A well-dressed older man near the concierge scoffed loudly. "This is a five-star hotel, not a political stage," he grumbled. "If they have a policy, he should respect it." Richard took a measured breath. The one thing he couldn't afford was losing control of the narrative. "This isn't about personal beliefs, Mr. Musk," he replied, keeping his voice neutral, professional, detached. "It's about maintaining an environment where all guests feel comfortable." Musk tilted his head slightly, considering him. "And what exactly about me makes people uncomfortable?" His voice wasn't aggressive, but it carried a weight that demanded an answer. Richard hesitated. He wasn't about to admit that it wasn't just anyone wearing that hat. It was him. Elon Musk, a man whose every action triggered fierce public debates. A man who could shift stock markets with a tweet. The silence stretched, unspoken tension filling the space between them. Before Richard could respond, James Carter, the senior security officer, took a firm step forward, arms crossed. "Sir, if you refuse to comply, we'll have to ask you to leave." His voice was steady, but the way his jaw tensed showed he knew this wasn't a normal eviction. Musk let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "You're going to forcibly remove me from a hotel for wearing a hat?" His tone was light, but the implication was anything but. He gestured around, sweeping his hand toward the cameras, the guests, the hotel staff. "Go ahead, let the world see." That did it. The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and cheers. Some whipped out their phones, angling to capture every second. Others started shouting over one another. "This is ridiculous. He's not bothering anyone. It's private property. They have the right to enforce their rules." Musk is right. What's the real issue here? Richard clenched his jaw, realizing that this was no longer just a hotel policy issue. It had become something far bigger. A social spectacle, a public referendum on corporate rules, personal expression, and the very definition of neutrality. Mia Rosario, the younger security guard, shifted uncomfortably, her gaze darting between Musk, Richard, and the growing crowd. Quietly, she leaned toward Richard and whispered, "Sir, this is already live streaming. It's trending." Richard inhaled sharply. He had spent his career avoiding PR disasters, keeping the Grand Manhattan out of scandalous headlines. Yet, here he was, in the middle of a storm. Musk, noticing his hesitation, took a deliberate step forward, his voice dropping just slightly, enough to draw people in. "Tell me something, Mr. Langley," he said, his expression unreadable. "Is this really about the hat, or about who you think I am?" The words hit like a bullet. For the first time since this began, Richard faltered. And the crowd knew it. The weight of Musk's question hung in the air, suspending the crowd in a moment of collective anticipation. The low hum of conversations that once filled the Grand Manhattan's luxurious lobby had vanished, replaced by something heavier, an unspoken challenge that no one was prepared for. Was this really about the hat? Richard Langley, for all his years of handling high-profile guests, corporate crises, and delicate PR nightmares, suddenly felt as though he was standing in quicksand. Every instinct told him to stick to the rules, to enforce the hotel's policies as he had done for decades. But Musk's words had peeled back something deeper, something uncomfortable. A part of him recognized that this had become more than just a dress code violation. Before Richard could find the right response, Musk reached into his suit jacket, moving with the kind of slow deliberation that only someone completely in control of the moment could afford. "This," Musk said, his voice calm yet firm, "is why I'm here." The crowd hushed instantly, drawn in by the mystery, their curiosity outweighing their earlier division. Even Richard, despite himself, felt his pulse quicken. Musk unfolded the paper deliberately, allowing the cameras that had been recording him from the start to zoom in. The thin sheet crinkled softly, its edges worn from handling. "This," he continued, "is a letter from someone who works here. A letter asking for help." A few murmurs rippled through the elegantly dressed guests and hotel staff alike. A hotel employee? This wasn't what anyone had expected. Richard's brow furrowed, his frustration beginning to give way to something else. Curiosity? Uncertainty? Musk took his time, scanning the room as though giving everyone present a chance to absorb what was happening. Then, he turned his gaze toward the cafe tucked into the corner of the hotel lobby. His eyes landed on a young woman in a neatly pressed uniform, standing frozen behind the counter, a tray of untouched lattes in her trembling hands. Sofia Martinez, 22 years old. Her face drained of color as she realized every pair of eyes in the room was now on her. "No, no way," Sofia whispered, her breath catching in her throat. She had written the letter weeks ago, never expecting a response, let alone this. Musk's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "Sofia wrote to me about her mother's medical bills, about working double shifts just to keep the lights on, about dreaming of college but never having the chance to afford it." He turned back to Richard, his gaze unyielding. "She didn't ask for money, she asked for advice. She asked if it was possible to dream when the odds were stacked against her." A collective hush fell over the crowd. Even the most cynical guests, the ones who had been muttering about hotel rules, about corporate policies, about private property, now stood in thoughtful silence. Sofia's legs felt weak as the weight of Musk's words settled over her. She had been invisible here, just another employee in a sea of polished service workers, brewing coffee for guests who never bothered to learn her name. And now, her hands clenched around the tray, her knuckles white as she struggled to process what was happening. Musk turned toward her once more. "Sofia," he said gently, motioning toward her, "come here." For a brief moment, panic gripped her. She considered running, disappearing behind the espresso machines, avoiding the weight of this moment. Maybe if she stepped back, the crowd would turn away, forget this ever happened. But something in Musk's gaze held her in place. It wasn't pity. It wasn't some grand billionaire spectacle. It was expectation. Hope? Slowly, hesitantly, Sofia stepped forward. The world watched in silence. Sofia's legs felt unsteady as she stepped out from behind the cafe counter, each step pulling her deeper into a moment she never could have imagined. The Grand Manhattan's grand lobby, a place where she had served countless lattes and pastries without a second glance from its wealthy guests, was now silent, all eyes on her. She swallowed hard, her hands clenched at her sides, and stopped just a few feet away from Elon Musk, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the whispers around her. Musk studied her face for a moment, then smiled, not the polite, distant kind she was used to from high-profile guests, but something warmer, almost reassuring. He extended the letter toward her. "You were brave to write this," he said, his voice softer now, free of the amused defiance he had shown earlier. "And you were right. I read every word." Sofia's breath hitched. She had written the letter on a whim, pouring out her frustrations late one night after another exhausting shift, never actually believing he would read it, let alone show up in person. She blinked back tears, shaking her head slightly. I didn't think anyone would care," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Musk's expression hardened, not in anger but in certainty. "I do," he said simply. Then, without any theatrics, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. The crowd leaned in, the air crackling with anticipation. Sofia hesitated before taking the envelope, her fingers trembling as she carefully opened it. The second she saw the number written on the check, her breath caught in her throat. $50,000. A gasp rippled through the assembled guests, followed by an eruption of whispers. Sofia stared at the check, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No. This can't be real," she stammered, her hands clutching the paper like it might vanish if she blinked too hard. Musk's voice was steady. "It's real," he assured her. "Consider it an investment in your future." Sofia covered her mouth with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. Tears blurred her vision, and when she finally looked up, Musk was still watching her, his expression unreadable, but there was kindness in his eyes. The crowd erupted into applause, some people wiping their own tears of disbelief and admiration. Even Richard Langley, the strict, rule-bound hotel manager, found himself clapping hesitantly, caught up in the raw humanity of the moment. Sofia's voice shook as she whispered, I don't know what to say." Musk's smile returned, this time with something almost playful behind it. "Then don't say anything yet," he said. "Just promise me one thing." Sofia nodded quickly, her chest still tight with emotion. "Anything." Musk tilted his head slightly. "When you're in a position to help someone else," he said, "pay it forward." Sofia clutched the check to her chest, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. "I will," she whispered. And she meant it. The lobby of the Grand Manhattan had never witnessed a moment quite like this, one that started with controversy but ended with something far more profound. As the applause gradually faded, guests murmured among themselves, some still recording, others simply absorbing what had just happened. Sofia stood in the center of it all, the $50,000 check still clutched tightly in her hands, as if letting go would somehow make it disappear. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. Richard Langley, ever the professional, exhaled slowly, the weight of his earlier stance settling heavily on him. He stepped forward, extending a hand to Musk. "I was so focused on enforcing policy," he admitted, "that I didn't take a moment to see the bigger picture. I'm sorry." Musk shook his hand, his expression one of quiet amusement. "Apology accepted. Just remember, people are more than the rules we impose on them." As Musk made his way toward the exit, the crowd parted for him like he was a force of nature. Within hours, the moment would be trending worldwide, a debate of rules versus compassion. But for Sofia, it was much simpler. For the first time, her future felt possible. The confrontation at the Grand Manhattan was never really about a hat. It was about perception, power, and the way we judge others based on surface-level details. Richard Langley, a man devoted to rules and order, learned that sometimes policies can blind us to the bigger picture. In his effort to enforce neutrality, he failed to recognize the humanity behind the situation. Elon Musk's actions demonstrated that true influence isn't just about wealth or status. It's about using power to uplift others. Sofia's story was nearly lost in the spectacle, but Musk made sure it wasn't. He reminded everyone that compassion should never take a backseat to bureaucracy, and that people should be seen for who they are, not just for what they wear or represent. This incident also revealed the power of social perception, how quickly narratives form and how the world watches, ready to pass judgment. In the end, Richard acknowledged that rules should serve people, not the other way around. The real lesson? Moments of conflict can become opportunities for understanding, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness, like listening, can change someone's life.